got online today? Andy, do you have any idea? 10 or 15 folks, that's good. All right. Andy, I'm buzzing. Feedback. All right, so we're picking up still in Gospel of Luke. This week we are looking at the 18th chapter. Just wanted to give you again kind of the wrap of that. So you'll see on the screen shortly just an overview of the 18th chapter of the Gospel of Luke. First of all, we had the parable of the widow and the unjust judge. Then we had the parable of the Pharisee and the tax collector, which is the one we're going to do today, or the publican, as it's often called in translations. Then from there it goes into Jesus blesses the little children, the rich ruler. Then a third time Jesus foretells his death, and we'll talk about that a little bit today. Jesus heals a blind beggar near Jericho, and that's the 18th chapter, and it moves from there on into the 19th chapter, where we have the first encounter with Zacchaeus that is there. So moves from this story into Zacchaeus, and then the parable of the 10 pounds, which is what Phil did for us last week. We're backtracking just a little bit this week, but you know, we're on a journey, and the journey is here. And just to remind you a little bit of the journey, I've got the map up this week. We have the story of Jesus encountering Zacchaeus in Jericho, and he has been here and moving that way. But just a reminder about where has Jesus been up to this point? Where was he physically? Look at the map. Yeah, he's up in the Galilee, and he's on. Remember, Jesus is moving toward Jerusalem. And this map reminds you that there's several different ways to go to Jericho, go to Jerusalem from the Galilee. And most of the traditional place is the one that's in red, there, or orange, I guess it is, red, that goes crossing the Jordan River, and then down through Jordan, through the Jordan Valley, and then crossing back over into Jericho. And then from Jericho, you do the ascension from Jericho, 17 miles uphill to Jerusalem. The other way, obviously, to go around was to go towards the Mediterranean. And then we have that middle section, the place you weren't supposed to go. As an Orthodox Jew, you were not supposed to go through Samaria, but we hear the stories of Jesus where it said he had to go through Samaria. And those stories are often then the encounter of the woman at the well, those kinds of encounters along the way. And so he has come, but he's on his way to Jericho. And this is, again, remembering that this is the mission that Jesus is on. This is leading towards Holy Week. At this point. And so he's on his way. He's gotten to Jericho so far. And interestingly, you know, he set his sights on Jerusalem, but yet he takes time out along the way to encounter people. And so just as we saw here in the 18th chapter, we have him encountering the beggar, the blind, healing the blind guy. He's on his way to Jericho. He's on his way to the holy city. He's on his way to Holy Week. He's on his way to the climax of his earthly ministry. And yet, even in the midst of that, he stops long enough to heal people along the way. He encounters people. He continues to be in ministry the whole way. And he gets then to Jericho. So he is getting ready to head up the hill with that. It's quite an ascension that takes place with that. It's not an easy trek. This is also the road in which the story of the Good Samaritan takes place. This is the wilderness area that we're part of. So we're moving on then to the 18th chapter, the 9th through the 14th verses. He also told this parable to some who trusted in themselves that they were righteous and regarded others with contempt. Two men went up to the temple to pray. One, a Pharisee. And who are Pharisees again? They're church leaders who live the law and encourage others. They become the kind of the example people look at in the way that you're supposed to live a faithful life. And so the Pharisees, so you have a Pharisee that is there, and the other guy is a tax collector. And what do people think about tax collectors? Boo. Yeah, still carries on today, I guess, with that. So you have these two guys that are going to the temple to pray. And so the Pharisee is standing by himself and praying thus: God, I thank you, I am not like the other people, thieves, rogues, adulterers, even like this tax collector who's sitting over here running the slides for us today. I fast twice a week. I fast twice a week. I give 1/10 of all my income. But the tax collector, standing far off, would not even look up to heaven, but was beating his breast and saying, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. I tell you, this man went down to his home justified rather than the other. For all who exalt themselves will be humbled, but all who humble themselves will be exalted. And I found this neat little cartoon here. God, I thank you that I am not like other people, like that guy. God, be merciful to me, a sinner. Now, in this story, you have two primary people here. You have two men, a Pharisee and a tax collector. And the story says that they go to the temple to pray. The Pharisee standing by him, this is how the Pharisee prays. The Pharisee standing by himself was praying thus: God, I thank you, I am not like other people, thieves, rogues, adulterers, or even like the tax collector. I fast twice a week. I give 1/10 of my income. Okay, in that, where's the prayer? He's gone to the temple to pray, and what's he praying in his idea? He went up to pray, but it turns out he's really not praying. What he is saying here is he spoke of himself. He talks not to God, but he's not praying to God, but he's just lifting himself up. He repeated the word I 4 times in this particular translation. Sometimes in the translations, there's 5 different I's. He talks about himself here instead of that. His attitude in the midst of this is, my will be done, not thy will be done, God. I'm the one that's the sinner here. You know, oh God, my prayer is I'm not like other people who are less fortunate than me, because I have everything I need. And the Pharisees praised God, but not for God who God was, but because of who he is in his own life. Thank goodness none of us ever do that. More than once a day. You know, egocentricity is one of the things that it hits us all here. And he says, I'm not like other people. And first of all, that he's comparing himself to others. Thank you, I'm not like all these other people. Comparing yourselves to others. How often do we get caught up into that? We talk about what's fair and what's not fair based on how others are treated. I was listening to the radio this morning coming in about all these new contracts the Braves are getting up. And the conversation on the radio was, what's fair? You know, how come these people get this money and these people don't get that money and all that? And they were talking about these young guys and the fact that we nailed them down for the next several years, and the benefit to them, you know, of what this kind of contract does for them now versus later on. But again, they started comparing all these players and who gets what and who gets what and who's worth it and who's not worth it and which ones are going to fall short and which ones are going to do well. It's just part of who we are, trying to figure out how well we're doing compared to what others are doing. And for those of us that unfortunately don't often get the kind of contracts that others get, we think in our own minds, it's why is it fair for the way it turns out? So I thank you that I'm not like others in with that. Or even this tax collector, even this tax collector, is thank God I'm not like him. And the interesting thing is that going to the temple was a big deal. We come to our church, and it's a big deal that we are here. It changes our lives. It transforms us for who we are. And so to be here at the temple, be at our church is a very important thing. But how we come and the attitude in which we bring and the way that we do that, we don't have the parade of people down the aisle showing everybody that we are here. Some people sit in the choir so everybody can see them, but but the reality is, we come to church because this is where we need to be, and we come hopefully to be there. But one of the interesting things about guys when they went to the church, if they were in a time of fasting, often you would whiten your face. You would, again, a symbol of the time that you were doing that. So having the tax collectors there, and the interesting thing is that a lot of the guys that used to go to the temple to fast or to show people they were fasting and to humble themselves would go on Mondays and Thursdays. Now, why would they go on Monday and Thursdays? It was market day. That's when the temple was full of people. And so you would go there just to show people that you were fasting, that you're being, what's that? Christmas and Easter, right? With that. And so they would do that. And they do these 2 days because by tradition, it was the days, the second day, the fifth day of the week on Thursday, by tradition, Moses went up on the mountain to be with God and to receive the law. And then it was on the second day of the week by tradition in which he came down, which was on Monday. And so Monday and Thursday were days that were important to folks that were righteous and religious and in their faith. So they would go for those days, but that was the day that everybody's there. So if you wanted to be seen, check in the box, and so if you were there on those days, you were sure that others were going to see you. So then, but what about this tax collector? But the tax collector, standing far off, would not even look up to heaven, but was beating his breast and saying, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. In some translations, interesting, use the word the sinner. Forgive me, God, for be merciful to me, because I am the sinner. There's nothing worse than what I am experiencing, nothing worse than me with that. So be merciful to me, oh God. And they said that the word that is used for beating his chest was just a continuous beating. It was not a once or twice kind of thing. It's just, oh God, I am remembering the pain. I am remembering what I have done that is less than what you have called me to do. And so the tax collector relied on the mercy and the compassion of God. He goes and humbles himself, is the words that are used. And he recognized himself as a sinner, the sinner, beats his chest continuously, so aware that his sin and his corruption, that he did this continuously. I just can't get over this. And the Pharisee was not like other men because he felt like he was better than others. The tax collector was not like others because he thought he was worse than others. And so he asked God to be merciful upon him through God's atoning sacrifice through God's atoning sacrifice for sins. And so it's interesting that in this story then, I tell you, this man went down to his home justified rather than the other. For all who exalt themselves will be humbled, but all who humble themselves will be exalted. And what's that sound like? Isn't that first and last thing that Jesus talks about? You know, if you think you're first, you ought to be last. and if you're last, you can be invited to be the first, even as the remembrance of the table, being at the table. You sit at the lowest place on the table, so the host will come and invite you to the head table. Will come with that. So we humble ourselves. And so the whole justification that this guy received was immediate. It's not something he had to wait on. God was able to do that for him. But I thought it might be helpful to look at to us. The story is often talked about the difference between being righteous and pious and being humble. Now, there are some who argue that the guy, that the Pharisee, is really doing all the things he said in here that made him feel like he was somewhat elevated. You know, he's fasting twice a day, and that was twice a week, and that was more than was required or expected. He was giving his tithe and more. So he's doing all those things, and then on the other hand, he's doing it in a way that creates a problem. And so this whole sense of piety is the reflection of our commitment to God through prayer, worship, kindness, charity, love, humility, and mercy. It displays our reverence for God, revealing our devotion to God. So if piety is something that's a part of our faith, is it a good thing or a bad thing? What's the difference between good piety and bad piety? When you start keeping score. Yeah, when you're doing it for the frequent flyer miles. Yeah. Mm. And part of what Christ, what is what? Well, is you. Yeah, predestined is not something we do. But it is something I think is a part of human nature. You know, some would take it back to the fall, the fact that humanity from the very beginning has always sought to fulfill itself. You know, one of the things that this talks about is the egocentricity that we have. You know, it's hard for us to truly relate to what someone else is going through. We can have empathy, we can have sympathy, we can try as best I can to understand. I know how you feel. Well, do you? You know what it's like. Maybe you've experienced it before. But the reality is each of us is who we are. And that's the lens in which we look through life. And that's why it's sometimes hard. We take it within ourselves, and it's hard for us not to let go of that, because part of egocentricity is the ability to care for oneself. If you're not egocentric, sometimes self-care falls, and so there's that fine line of taking care of yourself and being aware of yourself to be so narcissistic, I guess, in some way, of just it's all about me. And that's all there is me. And what happens to me is what's important, where sometimes we learn through life and through faith that it's also how we care for others and what we do for them. And then we move on to this idea of humility. Humility is free from pride or arrogance. It's not proud or haughty. Doing nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. And again, it's kind of the same thing. Is humility a sign of weakness, or is it a sign of strength? Well, if it comes from God, it is strength. But again, we often talk. Yes, Michael. Yeah, when we move beyond ourselves and we truly care for others. We talk a lot about moving into faith from justification into sanctification, and part of that is being aware, but we get to the point where it's a part of who we are. It is who we are. It's what we do because of who we are. It's not something you have to think about it. A lot of times we're in situations that if we see someone who needs assistance, we automatically just respond. If we see someone who is out of sorts, we do what we can to see what we can do to help care for them. When we do those things without thinking is when we truly become humble in what we do and how we do it. So, sure. Yeah, it's when move beyond themselves to go care for others. So wouldn't you say like just mechanically and in terms of how we but just kind of break that down? Well, when we do things only because of what we gain from it, in that, you use the stock market analogy. I don't think those who deal with stocks are negative. All of us look at our own ability to care for ourselves based on the investments we make and what we hope to have in life. But again, I also know a lot of folks who do very, very well in the stock market who are extremely generous with what they do. And so, if all you do is build up for your own self-worth and your own self-good, then I think, sometimes it's maybe missing the mark. But if we take what we have from whatever situation it is and make sure that others are also cared for, then I think that is helpful. But I think it's more of me, and Fran, I think, nailed it. When you do it because of what others think of you or others, what you get out of it in the long run, then maybe you're missing the mark with that too. The challenge that I think we have with this particular story is it's real easy to draw the line and just say, this is how you ought to be, this is how you shouldn't be with it. But also, both of these guys have challenges. Both of these are striving and struggling with it. And it's just how they get it lived out that makes the challenge. So got some questions for you up here. And you can go whatever way you want to on things beyond this, but how do you feel about the Pharisee in the story? What's your first gut feeling when you read that? And then, why do you think the Pharisee acted like they did? Why do we act like we do? When do we become Pharisaic in our own lives? When in your life have you acted like the Pharisee in the story? And I would assume a lot of us have. And the other part of that is, how do you feel about the tax collector? Why do you think the tax collector acted the way he did? And when in your life have you acted like the tax collector in the story? And humbled yourself in the way it is implied there. So anyway, talk amongst yourselves. Have a good time. Get some more breakfast if you would like.